All That, Zoe 101, Sam and Cat, Victorious, Kenan and Kel. These are just some of the few shows that Dan Schneider was involved in. During his time, he became the guy at Nickelodeon to make or break you. I sit here today, in this chair, as a now 30-year-old so oblivious to what all these stars went through as a kid. Now that I've grown up and taken a look back, the problems were always there. 3 men under Nickelodeon's brand besides Dan Schneider have done such vile things that this video will not be enough. If you haven't watched the Quiet on Set documentary, I definitely encourage you to watch that before you come here. For everyone else, intro. Yeah, I'm back, but also, I'm black. Hey, what is up everybody? Yes, I returned to your phone, your computer, your TV, your tablet, your laptop. I don't know what you're watching me on right now, but seriously, if you are back, welcome back. It's me, it's Malcolm, and today, ladies and gentlemen, you clicked on the video, you know why we're here. Once again, I just want to get into it because I know for a fact this is going to be a long video. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the Quiet on Set documentary, both night 1 and night 2. I'm actually recording this right now, the day after night 1 came out on Investigation Discovery, and I will be recording night 2 reaction later. But since I knew this video was going to be long, I definitely wanted to record my reaction to night 1 first and kind of feel how I feel. I definitely had to calm down before I sat in this chair because I did feel a lot of things. A lot of things were very angry emotions, and I didn't want to come off super angry in this video, but I want to just talk and just react, I guess. They kind of do like the background as all documentaries do, and something that I didn't even think about until it was brought up was Dan Schneider in 2014 got the Kids' Choice Awards for like a Lifetime Achievement Award. Looking back at it, I know Nickelodeon heavily regrets that decision, saying we really like this person, was there for us, and to turn around and find out that Dan Schneider has been one of the most vile people under Nickelodeon's brand, I just feel like Nickelodeon just in a way regrets ever giving him that much recognition, even though somebody pointed out to me on Twitter that the guy in charge of Nickelodeon actually worked on All That with Dan Schneider around the time that Brian Peck got fired. So Nickelodeon acting like they didn't know about this Brian Peck thing until, recently. Again, I already said it in a video before, but it's bullshit. And I think that was kind of obvious. Even in reading Nickelodeon's PR statement, it was really obvious. So I just wanted to point that out, that somebody pointed that out to me. And then went on to the compilation videos of Dan Schneider and him, being creepy with feet, because that's kind of like the #1 thing that people know Dan Schneider to be creepy about. And there was like some YouTubers actually in the beginning that some of them I recognized, some of them I didn't recognize, but I could tell that some of the videos that they were showing in this compilation were from YouTube. So they have been watching us. Well, not me. I didn't make videos about Dan Schneider back then, but they were watching the commentary community talk about this for a while, because a lot of those videos seemed like years old, and even the articles about Dan Schneider being, abusive in the workplace are years old, so this wouldn't be that surprising. Then they started talking about like super specific clips, one being the Ariana Grande juice clip. If you don't know what I'm talking about, basically Ariana Grande had like this food item in her hand. She was like, I want to get the juice out, give me the juice, and it was very sexualized. And then there was like a part in the skit where like she pours water over herself while she's laying over the end of the bed. I don't remember that. Maybe I can't remember. I think Sam and Cat was past the time I watched Nickelodeon. Like, I've seen a few episodes here and there, but Apparently Sam and Cat had this whole thing online. They had like a Twitter account. It was just really bizarre, and just seeing that image of, a young Ariana Grande doing that, knowing how big of a star she is now, is very eerie. And then what really kind of like broke my heart in the beginning was Mark Summers. For those who do not know who Mark Summers is, he was the guy at Nickelodeon. Like, Double Dare was like a Nickelodeon staple for years and years. He just loved doing the show. Like, you could tell that when he was around Nickelodeon around that time, he really loved it. He really loved, interacting with the kids in like a safe way. And he looked at some of the clips. I guess the producer showed him some clips of what Nickelodeon was like after he left. And he basically was like, this is an era of Nickelodeon. And I think that in itself kind of hits home how drastic the shift of tone changed on Nickelodeon after, I guess, Dan Schneider came around, because it feels like all of this started when Dan Schneider came around. It feels like before Dan Schneider, it really wasn't that, I guess, prevalent or even accepted to have child actors behave this way. But after Dan Schneider came around, it was just kind of like a normalized thing. They also referenced Jeanette McCurdy, and she didn't speak directly in this 2-hour set of night one, but they did show some clips of, her talking about her book and things like that. So I thought, it was really interesting that they gave her a shout out. They showed Alexa Nicholas, who was on Zoe 101, who has been very vocal about how Nickelodeon did not protect her as a child. They also talked about how Nickelodeon back in the day was really kids and like zero adults around. And of course, they gave a background of Dan Schneider from his small role in Memphis, Tennessee, all the way to Head of the Class, which was like a really big show back in the day that I didn't really hear about. He was someone that didn't like how he was cast as like the funny fat kid. For someone that really hated being categorized as the funny fat kid, it's really ironic how he treated other people so stereotypically. They talked about how he was approached after, his success to write all that. With his partner, Ryan Robbins, even back in the day, you can see how young they were. They were kind of like this powerhouse for a good minute. And then they shift to Katrina Johnson, who was actually, now that I remember, she was one of my favorite cast members of all that. I think she was one of the funniest ones. She was definitely one of the more charismatic actors on the show. So seeing Katrina Johnson, like, it just like gave me a bunch of like flashback memories of all these skits that were like extremely funny to me as a kid. There was like a joke that she made about like her being flat, and how Dan was basically like there for all her auditions and all of her callbacks, and he really singled her out. It was like, I want you, I definitely want you to like be on this show. And I'm very glad that the documentary talked about power imbalances, because that's kind of been like a really big thing, especially with YouTubers taking advantage of their audience lately. Of course, we talked about James Charles' power imbalance, Colleen Ballinger power imbalance for those that have been here before. This is nothing new to us, but just to reiterate, a power imbalance is basically like someone really has like this ominous aura around them that's so, if you piss them off, you'll regret it kind of thing. And it's like, I don't want to do anything to upset them. I don't want to hurt them. I want to do everything I can to make this person happy. That person kind of realizes that, and they take advantage of that. We're going to talk about it later, but Dan Schneider was kind of like the person that was like, I can make or break you in Nickelodeon, so do not cross me. And right there and then is like textbook 101 power imbalance, where he's like showing his cards saying, I can end your career and there's nothing you can do about it. I think that's scary. Dan Schneider definitely, the more I look at like his face and like see how much he just like takes on things, he seems like a very angry person behind the scenes. As we're going to talk about a little bit later, that's not really that far off. One of the All That stars, Leon Frierson, I hope I said his name correctly, was talking about how for one skit he had to wear a leotard, and it was basically just like a leotard and underwear, and how it was very uncomfortable. And the whole bit of this skit was the character's name was Noseboy, and besides like this like nose that like was like really long on his face, the shoulder pads, and I kind of wish I got a photo of it, but it's in the documentary. The shoulder pads, the way they look like male genitalia. It really doesn't look like a nose. And this has kind of been one of the bigger complaints about Dan Schneider's Nickelodeon involvement, where there's like a lot of sexual imagery in his skits and in his shows that as a kid you don't realize, but then as an adult it's very shocking. There was actually one joke where one of the actresses on All That got squirted in the eye, and I don't know how to say it without getting super demonetized, but let's just say it's very super sexual. If there are kids watching, you know, I'm sorry. I don't think there's kids watching. I don't think kids watch my content. I hope they don't, because this is definitely not for kids. But it's very sexual. Let's just say something squirts in your eye. Let's just say that's super sexual. It's a sexual joke. That's the best way I can say it. And even the kids at the time said that they felt like they couldn't complain because Dan Schneider was that powerful. It's even wilder because this is the 90s we're talking about. Katrina Johnson recalls this time where she was told straight up that she couldn't be the fat one. Katrina Johnson was dancing 6 times a week, and I can't remember if her parents said it or she said it, but I think it was her parents. Her parents were basically like, she dances 6 times a week. There's not much more we can do to fit this image that you want. If you looked at Katrina Johnson and looked at how she looked on the show, she looked fine. She looked like a normal girl. I'm just very confused. I'm very confused where this came from. And what makes this even crazier is after Katrina hit puberty, she says that, you know, she got less and less time with Dan Schneider. She got less and less time on TV. And eventually it kind of pushed her out to the point where she was like, I'm just gonna go to college then. Then skipping to a story where Katrina says she was at this laugh club and she saw this kid, Amanda Bynes, and she basically introduced Dan Schneider to Amanda Bynes. The person that she introduced Dan Schneider to would eventually be the one to replace her, because, you know, Amanda was so young, she hasn't hit puberty yet, so in a way Dan Schneider saw this as his second chance to do what he wanted to do with Katrina, because the way it is being told, Katrina Johnson was supposed to be, you know, the it girl. She was supposed to be that girl. She was supposed to get her own show, all this stuff, right? And of course, you know, none of that happened. But 2 years after Katrina Johnson left, the Amanda Show came to be. I'm going to bring this up, and this isn't the shocking part, but we'll get to it. Of course, the kids had to go to school on set, like 3 hours at a time, I believe. But they did point out how Amanda really didn't have to follow the same rules as them. Like Amanda would get more one-on-one time with Dan, all this stuff, right? It was very clear that Dan Schneider had a new favorite when it came to what he wanted to do for all these future projects, which of course you got the Amanda Show, which is like a straight up solo show. You know, we have this, you know, young actress that's, you know, funny, charismatic, and she has her own show on Nickelodeon, when, you know, female representation in the media really wasn't like, it was either hypersexual or it was like the innocent like image. But like Amanda Bynes was kind of like this perfect person to do something else and go in a different venture. in a way. As is obvious with a lot of parents, Amanda Bynes' dad had a lot of expectations for her, obviously probably put a lot of pressure on her, but also Dan Schneider and Amanda Bynes' dad were really close, apparently. It was like way more closer than all the other child actor parents. So again, just proving that there is this favoritism that's going on set. You know, the documentary kept going on to the Amanda Show even more, talking about it more, and that's just kind of like the next part that they went into. However, the two female writers that were on the Amanda Show said that like this was the worst time of their lives. And those two women's names are Christy Stratton and Jenny Kilgen. They were the only two women writers on the Amanda Show. I would just like to let you sink in as we talk about what they went through with Dan Schneider, and then you can tell me if Nickelodeon didn't know shit about this, okay? First thing they came out the gate with when it came to Christy and Jenny was that they split salaries. And when I say split salaries, I don't mean like they had the same job title and they were getting paid the same. What I'm saying is they had the same title. However, it was like a 2-for-1 deal where they were getting half of what they were supposed to get. If that doesn't raise any alarm bells to the obvious sexism going on here, don't worry, we have a lot more examples that they talked about in the documentary. Thankfully, both women got along, which was probably the best part of this, is that they got along. I can only imagine if they were also arguing with each other and getting paid less. I can only imagine. They recall one time where Dan was in the writer's room and he was being extremely sexist, saying, "Name a funny woman," which is pretty much trying to degrade his only two women on his staff, on his writing staff. It's kind of like a one-upping. It's kind of like a prove me wrong kind of like joke, I guess. So Dan Schneider went up to one of the women and said, "Can I call you the girls?" And they said like, "No, we don't want to be called that." And he was like, "Good, I hate uptight girls." Let's talk about some of the things on the Amanda Show. Let's talk about the running gag of a character, Penelope. So Penelope was Amanda's #1 fan. She had a website that was real for a couple of years. I actually played on the site when I was a kid. And the whole gag is she wants to meet Amanda. She never gets to meet Amanda, right? So for the longest time, I thought Penelope's last name was Tate. Tate, right? Actually, that is not her name. The character's name is Penelope Taint, which is spelled Taynt. You're probably wondering what the big deal is here. However, Penelope Taint was basically a joke about taints. And this is further confirmed because Jenny and Christy talk about how Dan was like, "Don't tell the Nickelodeon executive what the joke is actually about," because the Nickelodeon executive asked, you know, what's this Penelope Taint thing? What's going on here? And he was just like, "Oh, it's just a name." He was basically like playing it off, even though he seemingly purposely named Amanda's like #1 fan character a dirty name. They also said that Dan Schneider would send both of them messages like demanding them to say stuff, and maybe it wasn't just them, but I think the whole premise was Dan Schneider would just send messages, and if you didn't do it, he would press you to do it more. So it would be something like, "Cluck like a chicken," and then you would have to literally cluck like a chicken on the spot. Can't really give any more examples, but basically it was pretty much like a call and response kind of thing, where it's like, if you don't do it, I'm going to make you do it. And there was even like this $300 bet to eat 2 pints of ice cream in like a limited amount of time. And Christy basically saying like, I didn't have any money, so why not just get, this $300? And she actually completed the challenge. She actually did the bet and won the bet, but Dan Schneider like never paid her. So there was like one time Dan Schneider talked about killing a fly, and he offered somebody $30 to kill this fly, and Christy heard this and made a joke about like, oh, I'll add it to your tab. And he got really upset about this, and he took her to his office in private and berated her, yelled at her, and said, how dare you? I'm so sorry for anyone that was affected, from Nickelodeon to Dan Schneider, the other vile human beings that we're going to talk about a little bit later. As you know, again, I'm 30 years old. I didn't know these things were going on, and like, I think my mom like tried to stop me from watching Nickelodeon here and there, but I was just very persistent. And now looking back at it, she was 1000% correct. So mom, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. So it jumps to the year 2000, and Nickelodeon was pretty much like a mini Hollywood at this point. The Kids' Choice Awards were basically like the child version of the Oscars, pretty much having similar categories like best movie, best actress, best actor, things like that, right? And they talked about the Amanda Show more and more, and Amanda's co-star Raquel Lee Boyo pretty much talked about her experience and saying like they were very well aware that they weren't the stars, they were just kind of there, and they were very aware that Amanda was the star and you were going to take her limelight away. And there was this one time Raquel had a birthday, and the people from the show got her like this really big cake. Everybody was having fun. It was really nice. And out of all people, Dan Schneider, I guess, didn't like that, because apparently he was like, that's a really big cake. Why did you guys give her that cake? And he was just really furious that I guess someone that wasn't Amanda was getting more attention at the time, which is very telling, because the more that Amanda and Dan got close, it just gives off this weird energy, and I can't really explain what that weird energy is, but I just don't like it. And something I talked about in my video before this one is about how the parents probably either sat back because they didn't want to like ruin their child's dreams, or they were probably like oblivious, or they knew about it and didn't care. Apparently Raquel's mom wanted to speak up, but she didn't want to like get in her child's way and like ruin her shot. Then we skip to Karen Finley Thompson, who talked about how close Amanda and Dan were physically. And this is where I'm going to talk about a skit that I didn't think about how weird it was until, of course, I grew up and like I watched it again. We're going to talk about Amanda's Jacuzzi, okay? Amanda's Jacuzzi was this one skit in the Amanda Show where Amanda would be sitting in a hot tub, as a minor, and you have these grown adults walking, like being in the hot tub with her, and the whole gag was she's interviewing people that are like really out there. So you had like Frankenstein, you had, Cleopatra, or, the Queen Elizabeth. I think in the docuseries, Dan Schneider, she did Dan Schneider one time, which Dan Schneider was the one in charge of the show. It's so weird, right? What makes this alarming is Amanda was the only one in like swimwear. And I'm going to show it here, where basically all these adults were fully clothed, but Amanda was the only one in like a swimsuit. And I'm very confused how this was okayed by Nickelodeon, because as we remember from my other video, Dan Schneider basically said that all of his skits and all of his stuff was approved by Nickelodeon. So how this was greenlit, looking back at it, I don't get it. Also, side note, apparently Dan Schneider was showing porn on his computer. That's alarming to do around kids. And just going back to the power imbalance once again, apparently Dan Schneider would ask for things in exchange for putting something in the show. So he would be like, oh, if you give me a massage, I'll put your skit in the show. Or, oh, if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. It was like a quid pro quo kind of thing. The more you think about it, it was just more like a power abuse and just being this guy that took advantage of the people around him. Because why are you pretty much being so weird with your employees to basically say, hey, this one shot to get some credit, do something for me? How was that okay? I don't get it. We're gonna talk about this once, and I'll just feel how I'm gonna feel after I say it again because my jaw dropped here. Christy was trying to pitch an idea in a room full of men, mind you. Okay. Dan Schneider says, lean over the table and act like you're being sodomized. He, as a grown man, in a room full of grown men that laughed at this, by the way, really told another human being to lean over and act like they're being sodomized. What great person. What an amazing person. There's no way that this guy isn't a piece of shit, right? Where are the men that were writers on the show? Where are they? Because how the hell are you gonna sit there as a grown man and watch another grown man degrade a woman in front of you and you don't say shit? And I get it. I understand that Dan Schneider had all this power, whatever. But in a room full of grown men, if like 3 people said, hey, that's a little too far, I'm uncomfortable with that, I feel like he would have stopped, you know? But for these men to laugh, this just goes to show how Dan Schneider got away with all of this for so long, you know? Going ahead, mid-season of the first season, I believe, they were informed that splitting salaries was against the rules. So Dan called Jenny about this because he believed the Writers Guild pressed them about this because she was apparently conspiring against them, from what he believed. And Virgil talked about how the vibe was different when he walked on set. So for those that do know who Virgil is, I'm just going to read a quick bio for you right here. Virgil Fabian was born on August 1st, 1963 in Orlando, Florida, USA. He's a director, producer known for The Brothers Garcia, All That, and Kenan and Kel. Basically, after the Writers Guild got to Dan Schneider, apparently Virgil said that Dan Schneider was very much different after that. The Amanda Show set was extremely tense near the end, and Christy was fired, I think, after season 1, essentially for having free time on her off day. Basically, if you worked under Dan Schneider, the expectation was you were his. Like, you had no free time. If he wanted you to do something, you do it, right? So on Christy's off days, apparently she like went to a concert and like she was hanging out with friends one time, and I guess Dan didn't like that because he fired her after season 1. This probably could have been also because the Writers Guild forced him to pay both women full salaries. So maybe that was another reason why. Jenny was told she would be hired back to the show for 27 weeks. However, 11 of those weeks were going to be free. So she was not going to get paid for 11 weeks of work. Dan Schneider claims he had no control of these salaries while also hiring a white male with a full salary. So you're telling one person that they have to work for free while also hiring another person that's a man full salary. Jenny walks into Dan's office, I guess, to pitch an idea, and Dan Schneider kind of cut her off and was like, hey, didn't you used to do phone sex? I feel like you told me you used to do phone sex. And of course, that's not true. Jenny never said that. She's never like even made a joke about that. And basically, she said after that interaction, she just up and quit because that was enough for her. This led to Jenny then suing Dan Schneider and telling Christy about it. She did it because she didn't want other women to suffer, and an investigation happened and she got a settlement. So I'm going to read a little bit of this news article talking about that settlement right here. Jenny Kilgen sued Nickelodeon for gender discrimination shortly thereafter. Stratton wrote a letter in support of Kilgen to assist with the filing. In the documentary, we see an excerpt of the suit against Storybook Productions that shows Kilgen claims Schneider denied her equal pay. The suit was settled for an undisclosed amount. In the documentary, it was pretty much like gender discrimination, unequal pay. It was just a lot of like big red flags that should have got any other person blacklisted from Hollywood for good, but somehow Dan Schneider survived this. I don't get it. This is where we get the first mention of Jason Handy. And it was very ominous because I heard 9-year-old girl. We skip to MJ, who was this child Brandy's mom, and Brandy was someone that like loved the Amanda Show. She had an extra role in like a classroom scene for one skit, and apparently parents weren't allowed back on set, and like Jason Handy was kind of like in charge of the kids, like of all like the non-starred actors, I guess. And he ended up exchanging numbers with kids and parents, and a week after she guest starred on the Amanda Show, Jason sent an email that showed talking about like shows he was working on, I guess to entice her about other opportunities, and I guess they ended up talking more. MJ, which is Brandy's mom, said she didn't see any issue at the time. One time, and this it only takes one, so here we go. One time, Brandy got a message. She stopped. She slammed her computer and ran straight to her room and locked the door. What was in that email, you ask, my friends? It was Jason. It was an email from Jason of him naked, pleasuring himself, and sending it to Brandy specifically, telling her that he was thinking about her. And I'm trying to be very lenient here when it comes to, everybody affected, but MJ, with physical evidence in front of her, did not call the police right there and then. I know we talked about, the parents' responsibility when it comes to child actors, but I feel like when it comes to cases like this, that's very open and shut. I find it very irresponsible that you did not call the police immediately after that. And the fact that this Jason guy was so bold to do that to your daughter, I really question, were you scared for her, or were you scared for that, financial security that you were hoping for? And I don't say this in a mean way. I'm just saying this as someone that's observing. They skipped to 2002, and they talked about the What I Like About You show that starred Amanda Bynes, but she's definitely older at this point and very much more mature. And I didn't know that Dan Schneider was involved with that show. And apparently Dan Schneider and Will Cahoon kept butting heads over the show, and eventually Dan was kind of pushed out, but he did get to keep like name credit on the show. So, and Dan Schneider says that, he wasn't pushed out, he kind of left by choice, which I don't think that's true. I think he got pushed out. This jumped to Amanda Bynes running away from home, and out of all people, she goes to Dan Schneider. Now, they even said in the documentary that the details were murky, but the police got involved. Then this leads to Amanda Bynes wanting to be emancipated. And at this point, even even not knowing what Dan Schneider was going to be, even at this point, Dan Schneider definitely feels way too involved. Like, this isn't your kid. Like, you're not even related by blood, you know? And you're trying to help, you know, a teenager essentially get emancipated from her parents. And this kind of put such a strain on all relationships involved. So the Dan Schneider Amanda Bynes relationship dissipated, and then Amanda Bynes' relationship with her parents kind of got really strained. So Dan Schneider and Amanda Bynes are kind of done here, thankfully. This then led to Dan Schneider going back to, you know, Nickelodeon. And this basically led to the revival of all that. But this came at a cost. One of the All That stars from the revival, Giovanni Samuels, talked about her experience and basically saying that she was very well aware that she was the token black girl. As someone that was like a token black friend in high school in like one group of people, I definitely understand what she's talking about, where, you know, you're in this group of, you know, all these, you know, non-POC people, and you're like the only person standing out. You're gonna tell very fast that you're just kind of there as like the token. And, you know, we're gonna get into a little bit of racism here, a little bit of like microaggressions very shortly, so, you know, buckle up for that. And then we get to Kyle Sullivan, who I talked about in my last video, and he kind of got a starting role on All That from doing a guest role on the Amanda Show on the Blockbuster sketch, which was like a parody of Blockbuster. That's kind of obvious. I think that Blockbuster sketch was kind of offensive, if you really think about it, but whatever. And then you have Ryan Christopher Hearn, who basically talked about, you know, the set was dysfunctional, you could get away with a lot more. If they asked you to stay behind and work extra, you'll be able to do it, even though, you know, child labor laws were definitely a thing at this point. Brian, from his experience, said that the white actors definitely got better treatment on set. He was part of a skit where basically he was supposed to be a dealer, but it was like cookies. But the way he was acting was like a stereotypical, you know, black person dealing drugs in the hood, which is, of course, microaggressive as fuck. I'm gonna talk about Lil Fetus, okay? Lil Fetus is this rapper. Of course, you have the black person being a rapper out of all people. So in this skit, it's a very short skit. You have Brian in this bodysuit, and of course the bodysuit had to guess match his skin tone because he's supposed to be a fetus in a womb. However, someone made the slickest ass comment that it should be a charcoal skin bodysuit. I have some things to say. I don't know which Nickelodeon staff that was. I don't know who that was, but fuck you, you racist piece of shit. How dare you? The fact that it was just like, that was okay to say is telling. The person that was the makeup artist, like getting Brian ready, was kind of like calming him down, was saying like, you know, it's okay, you know, don't worry about it, which, no, screw that. Like, how dare you? Brian's mom, which, God bless her soul, Brian's mom was definitely very vocal about things that she didn't like on the set. And long story short about Brian's mom, she was basically told to keep quiet and stop complaining. Which, hello, that's a giant red flag. Hello, we're gonna talk about on-air dare now, okay? This was something that was so deep in my memories that I did not remember it existing, and I know why. It's because even as a kid, I didn't like this concept and I thought it made me uncomfortable, and I actually remember changing the channels a few times because on-air dare is basically you have the kid actors doing fear factor type stunts where you will either drink something gross, eat something gross, what have you, right? Brian and his story, and you can even see how annoyed and like uncomfortable he is in the video. He was covered in peanut butter for a dare, And not only that, there were like dogs that came out and started licking his body. I don't know which executives at Nickelodeon thought that, this, especially something that actually puts kids in super vulnerable positions, I don't know how this was okay. And it just broke my heart to see this kid, this teenager who was 13 at the time, being pretty much degraded in front of his friends. And we kind of laughed at that. Why is this on TV? So I went to go find more stuff from the on air dare, and I was going to include a video clip here, but I don't want this video to get claimed because it absolutely would, because it's Viacom. I wouldn't be surprised. But basically, there was this one All That cast member who had to do a dare where she had to drink bath water that this like trucker was shaving in, and that was like supposed to be funny. And they counted it down, they put the pitcher in the water, they put it in a cup, and then gave the cup to the actress. And when I looked at the clip, it looks like she really didn't drink it. She just more so just poured it on her face. But even as you can see, even that just puts another child actor in such a weird, vulnerable position, because it just looks weird. It doesn't look right. And I'm gonna skip over some like miscellaneous notes because I did take a lot, because I know this video is already getting over an hour long and I'm not even at night 2 yet. But basically, Dan Schneider was like the golden child, and Dan Schneider really cared about the Nielsen ratings. And Nielsen ratings have been something that, you really don't hear about. It's more so like a measuring tool. But to give you like the real definition of like what the Nielsen ratings are, to show how much Dan Schneider cared about being at the top, let's just read the quick definition of Nielsen rating. Nielsen TV ratings, commonly referred to as Nielsen ratings, are the audience measurement systems operated by Nielsen Media Research that seek to determine the audience size and composition of television programming in the United States using a rating system. Nielsen lost accreditation by the MRC in 2022 due to inaccurate data reporting during the COVID-19 pandemic, but regained it in April of 2023. So basically, the Nielsen ratings can make or break a show. If the show is that bad, the Nielsen ratings will tell you, and it's up to the people in charge if that show is axed or it gets renewed for another season. So I might be wrong, and I have a lot of notes in front of me, but I think it's like on a popularity scale of population. Obviously, cable TV shows should get more, because everybody at least had cable around this time. Now, if you had like a premium channel, like, the movie channels or something like that, of course the ratings are going to be lower because you have to pay extra for that. You had like MTV, who like had notoriously like high and low ratings all the time. Things like that. Of course, back to the sexism of Dan Schneider, he promised Karen Thompson a job, but didn't give it to her, and then gave it to a younger guy with zero experience in the same field, which led her to quitting working with Dan Schneider and like working on any other projects with him after that. And again, Dan Schneider, even though he doesn't show his repulsive face, says he never considered gender while hiring, yet in 2 separate stories, we have men getting more than the women in the same field. And in a way, he did have control of that. So I don't know what he is talking about, to be honest. So Virgil talks about his experience and said like he was going through things, and says that Dan Schneider kept pushing his buttons. So he was fired without Dan even talking to him. And that still bothers Virgil to this day. For those that are wondering if Virgil's on the good side or the bad side of this, Giovanni says that Virgil was like one of the few people that were like there for them. He was very protective of the kids. So Virgil, definitely a good guy in my book. I did want to point this out, is that Virgil was at the end of the trailer that was very unaware that Brian Peck did something on a show that he was a part of. And that just kind of goes to show how sneaky that Brian Peck was. Again, we already talked about Brian Peck. We're going to talk about him a little bit later. But I just wanted to bring that up. And this is kind of like how bad Hollywood can truly be. All That actor Brian was hoping he would get his family out the hood, which I feel like that's fair. If you have a chance to get your family out of, the hood, do it. His mom got a call, I think, from their agent, his agent, and they went downtown and they were basically told that Brian wasn't being invited back. So you got to think, you're 13 at the time, you had this dream in front of you, and then it's taken away just like that. And Brian's mom says that it ruined their relationship, and getting kicked off the show still affects Brian to this day. To this day. My battery died, so it might look like I'm a little bit different, like I'm at a different angle, so that's because my camera is plugged into the wall because this video was taking so long and my battery died. So we're back. Jason Handy, we're going to talk about this, okay? Jason Handy in April of 2003. This is kind of where everything kind of like collides into one. MJ, who was Brandy's mom, once again, MJ got a call from the LAPD asking to talk to Brandy. Jason Handy was, again, a personal assistant to the children on the Amanda Show. It was his job to walk the kids around on the set. He was investigated and had CP, 7 video files of minors, thousands of pictures, Ziploc bags of tokens from the kids he messed with, even having the underwear of a 7-year-old girl. Can I speak? There's a place in hell, if you believe in it, for people like this, okay? There is no rehabilitating this, because he openly admitted that he is very almost boisterous and proud of it, right? Remember, he sent a video of him pleasuring himself to a minor, not even thinking about the consequences. That's how sick and twisted this man is, right? Jason Handy, in another incident, was with this Cousin Skeeter guest star, and this person is not named, so I tried to find the name, but honestly, if their name is anonymous, then I can't find it, and I'm not gonna super dig deep to try to find it, because that's not the point here. The point is, he was in her house alone in her room. I have a question for the parents. What the hell are y'all doing? Because how the hell do you have a grown-ass man with your child in a room unsupervised? I have questions. I have questions. I'm sorry. So I think they were like playing like a game in her room, and he kissed her twice and then tried to keep going. Insinuate what you will, what I mean by that, but I think you can already tell, sadly. He tried to be like, oh, I'll get you more shows, and he only got sentenced, and this is what gets me, right? He got sentenced to 6 years on 2 misdemeanors, one of them being Brandy, right? And MJ said she no longer trusts her children around anyone in this industry. And Brandy never got an apology and felt like this was swept under the rug. That being said, apparently a lot of people did not come forward about Jason, and that goes to show either how scared the parents were or how much they depended on their child to make it that they weren't going to speak up. I mentioned this in my last video, like I said, that some parents are probably one of those parents that see their child as the breadwinner, and they didn't want to ruin that, and they saw their financial future and saw how easy it was going to be. And then you have the parents that were legitimately scared to speak up. Sadly for me, I feel like some of these parents saw their child as a meal ticket, didn't want to be in, a scandal, so they just didn't speak up. Of course, that's probably, that's just my opinion, but it just infuriates me that only 2 counts of misdemeanors and he only got 6 years. That that drives me that drives me nuts. That 6 years. The girl he got the underwear from was 7. Are you like there's gotta be a harsher punishment for CP, and maybe there is today, but it still feels like, especially when it comes to Hollywood, that these kind of things were just normal, or it's just brushed off like, oh, that guy, he's bad, but other people, we're not bad. It's just, I don't, I wish somebody would just explain to me how this was a thing, because it shouldn't be. Out of all the places you see groomers and pet, the last place you want to see them is on a children's program. And I can only think about the Disney stars, because this is strictly Nickelodeon. I can only think about the Disney stars that had dealt with similar or even worse things. Not even 4 months later, and this is where we get to Brian Peck, and I didn't know this until the documentary. 4 months later, in the same calendar year, Brian Peck was arrested for what he did to Drake Bell. So you have two predatory people, and within 4 months getting arrested under Dan Schneider, under Nickelodeon, and Nickelodeon has the gall and the gumption, the audacity to release a statement a couple days ago saying, they investigate everything, we take everything seriously, we do investigations. It was such a PR statement that it just felt so. Briefly going to talk about Brian Peck. And again, Brian Peck was Pickle Boy, and there was like this joke with a glory hole, and it was like brushed off really fast that it was just like a sense of humor. And he was in productions like, Good Burger and Keenan and Kel. And according to, a lot of all that alumni, Brian Peck was very likable, and you could hang out with him, you could have conversations with him. Apparently one time Giovanni walked on his back, which is kind of creepy if you really think about it. And we're going back to, of course, the barbecue story, which is what I talked about in my last video, but just a quick synopsis. Kyle Sullivan saw the John Wayne Gacy photo in Brian Peck's, I think it was, garage or whatever. But what they went into detail a little bit more in the documentary is that Kyle basically got everybody, like parents and kids, to like see what he was seeing. And again, Brian Peck was proudly showing that he was pen pals with a notorious serial killer, John Wayne Gacy. And if that is not one of the biggest red flags to a parent to get their child the hell up out of that house, I don't know what is. But also, this goes back to the culture that Dan Schneider could really make or break you. So if you speak up about something, it's not going to end well, And we're going to get to that because we're going back to the All That table reading where Brian Peck was gone, and Dan Schneider told the parents to get out. We're going to talk to the kids with our friends. Looking back at it now, it definitely feels more threatening, like a threatening atmosphere of, hey, Brian Peck, he's gone. However, does anybody else have anything to say? But you're putting children in this position in front of their friends that like that person to speak up. Dan Schneider says he had no role in telling, the parents what Brian Peck did. I feel like the parents should be the first wants to know what Brian Peck did. We're at the end of night one, where we saw that trailer from a couple days ago where Drake Bell came out, and that was the end of the first night of the Quiet on Set documentary. I want to save my overall thoughts for the end, so I'm going to stop it here because I haven't watched night 2 yet. Right now, it is the day of night 2. It is like 6:44 p.m. at the time of me stopping this recording. And then the next time you see me, I will be talking about the second episode of Quiet on Set, and then I will give you my final thoughts about everything in the end. So welcome back. It's probably been a quick cut for you, but for me it's been a couple of hours, and it's now like midnight, and they're rerunning part 2 of the Quiet on Set documentary as I speak. But I do have some notes. I have a lot of things to say. First and foremost, after hearing everything and seeing everything, I'm so sorry to everyone that has been affected. From the top to the bottom, from the costumer that was anonymous, to Drake Bell, to, Amanda Bynes even, to all of these stars that were just affected by the failure of all of the adults around them. Except for 2 that I'm going to talk about in a bit. I talked about Brian's mom in part 1. That's an amazing parent. I wish there was more of that. And then in this part, we're going to be talking about Drake Bell and his story a little bit more, even though I've already talked about it in another video. But we're going to also talk about his dad, because his dad really shines light on Brian Peck and just how calculated he was. They jumped to 2004 in January, and they're talking about Drake and Josh. This is around the time of Drake and Josh being filmed, or its pilot being filmed, something like that. But then it flashes back to August of 2003, which is where we kind of left off in a bit, with Brian Peck being arrested. And what makes this, I guess, more monumental is that this is Drake Bell's first time really telling his story of what Brian Peck did to him. I just want to give big shout out right now, like no joke, to Joe Bell, who is Drake's father. And they kind of go into this whole background of Drake and his family. His parents got divorced, and Joe Bell was the one that got Drake into acting. And I didn't know this, but Drake Bell was in like a lot of productions. He was in a lot of commercials, had a lot of guest starring roles. Like he was on Home Improvement, like things like that, right? And that led him to auditioning for the Amanda Show at 12. Apparently, I think Amanda herself wanted Drake on the show. And this led to just where everything kind of goes downhill from there. We jump back to 2000 and a place called Nick on Sunset. I've never really heard of this place, but it's pretty much like Paramount Studios, but like for Nickelodeon Studios in a way. This is around the time of the Amanda Show as well, so I just wanted to make sure that that is correct. Brian Peck, the man in question here, came around season 2 of the Amanda Show, and him and Drake Bell met the first day at the table read, and they connected through their love of Hollywood. And thank God, this again, Joe Bell, praying for your brother, said he kept his eye on them when they were at Brian Peck's house, because Brian Peck really, for some reason, has this thing where he really wanted people to come over to his house. Obviously, we know why, but it's just like I don't understand how parents didn't see a red flag before Drake's dad. Drake Bell says himself that maybe this common interest and all this stuff that he had with Brian Peck, it could have been very calculated. Now, when it comes to groomers and things like that, and them trying to, latch onto their target, It really does feel like there is this I'm so friendly, we get along, we like the same things. Let me get to know you. Like it always seems like that's the route they go because as long if they can get your guard down, if they can get you comfortable, then it's kind of free game for them, which is scary to think about. Joe would notice Brian Peck getting a little bit too close, and he would do some things like even in front of other people. And there was like a lot of weird touching, a lot of rubbing up and down the arm, which in today's society can be seen as sexual harassment. Joe Bell went to the producers about Brian Peck, and this 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 for some reason like I want to say I don't know how to say it, but my jaw dropped because I just thought it was like the biggest, like I don't know what this person was thinking when they said it, but they hit Joe back with he's gay, maybe you're homophobic. I would like to say, okay, I love the LGBTQIA plus community. I am such an ally of that community. I feel like that phrasing is not fair to the LGBT community because a creep is going to be a creep. Straight up, end of story. I don't like just because he's gay, that means like him being weirdly touching another person or whatever, and that being noticed by someone's father, that automatically means he's homophobic because he sees a grown ass 40-year-old dude touching on his son that's 15 at the time. It's not homophobic to voice your concerns. All you have to do is just have like a quick investigation, and if there was nothing, then you could just kill it right there, right? But to hit somebody that's a father and seeing that their 15-year-old son is being essentially like groped in a way is it's very irresponsible. And I know this was like what, the 2000s, so maybe that was just kind of like I don't know. I don't understand why that made that shocked me, but I feel that that was such a cowardice defense, and to really throw that again at someone that's a father seeing his teenage boy being weirdly touched and he thinks it's weird with and just shooting him down like that, I think that's a such a big problem, um and just very negligent on whoever told him that. In 2000, they were talking about the Drake and Josh show because Dan Schneider was approached. I forget, it was like an executive from Nickelodeon or whatever, where they saw Drake and Josh do a skit on the Amanda Show. They thought it was funny, and apparently they were looking for sitcom buddy shows at the time, and that was just like lightning in a bottle. It just hit it at the right time. So that's kind of how the Drake and Josh show came to be. However, once the Drake and Josh show was kind of in the air, it was kind of there, it was very exciting. That's when Brian Peck would get more obsessed. And I wrote attached to my notes, but after hearing what Brian Peck did and how he was doing all this stuff, he was very obsessed with Drake. As someone that's also a survivor, I'll just say right now, this Brian Peck guy was preying on Drake for such a long time. He was preying on a minor for such a long time. He seemed very like meticulous and like premeditated in how he was going to do this. And I think even that makes it more scary. Joe obviously voiced his concerns to Brian directly, and Brian was basically trying to say, parents shouldn't be managers, maybe I should be in charge, and all this stuff. And that's just kind of like step one of the manipulation here. And Drake Bell was also in a band, so he would go around and play. Like, if it was something local and nearby, Dan Schneider would show up, which is fine. However, when Drake would go a little bit further, like San Diego, which is like an hour away from Burbank, California, Brian Peck would still show up. And not only that, there was like the Strawberry Festival, and Brian Peck showed up again, this time with more of his adult friends. Which I'm very surprised that someone like that has friends, but also if you are very charismatic in Hollywood and you have all these connections, I can see how he got away with what he did for a long time. And even now, like, I'm gonna read a list of celebrities later that wrote letters of support. I I'm not really that surprised that Hollywood is okay with this kind of stuff, or they try to support, their fellow people with this kind of stuff. But I hope when I read this list later, all those celebrities, wherever they may be, they feel such shame and guilt and just the worst upset stomachs, because how dare you try to victim blame a 15-year-old? But I'm not there yet, but I will get back to that. Around Drake's birthday, and Brian Peck is basically saying, hey, I want Drake's party at my house, which really big timeout. It's so weird that you're offering to host a 15-year-old birthday at your house when they're not your relative. Like, yes, you may have this close relationship and whatnot, but it's weird, right? And and I know I'm not tripping because a lot of people online agree with that sentiment, how weird that was. This is kind of, I don't know if this was calculated, but maybe Brian Peck did calculate this, because Drake Bell lived an hour away from all of his friends on the show, so having this party at Brian Peck's house would make a lot more sense. That way he could hang out with everybody. So that's where he had the party. On Drake's 15th birthday, he got a birthday card, and there was like birthday cards from Brian Peck's friends, and they were saying a lot of adult things and a lot of inappropriate things that, a grown man shouldn't be saying to a 15-year-old, to the point where Joe was like, yo, what the hell is this? And Drake was pretty much like, I legitimately do not know. This leads to Brian Peck pretty much initiating his plan to separate Drake and his dad, because Joe Bell was so vigilant and very well aware of pretty much what Brian Peck was plotting at this point. So he would say things like, oh, Drake, your dad's stealing your money, or just saying anything to fill Drake's head with, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be around my dad, things like that. Like, that's the plan that Brian Peck pretty much implemented. This then led to, of course, Drake Bell, when he spent a week at his mom's house, pretty much saying, I don't want my dad to be my manager anymore. Sorry, I'm getting it backwards, but Brian Peck also contacted Drake's mom, basically cementing this Joe Bell is a really bad person thing. So it's like a 2 against 1. And Joe Bell just pretty much had to sit there and accept it and just kind of say, hey, whatever my son thinks is best, I will accept. And again, this really, really breaks my heart to see like a good dad right there trying to be there for his son and do all the right things and keep him safe. And then you have this vile, evil, vindictive man plotting on this guy. I would also like to say that Drake's dad, Joe, did personally tell Drake's mom about his feelings about Brian Peck, and he explicitly said that he told Drake's mother, do not let them be alone. And that is such, knowing that what we know now, that is such ominous and terrible foreshadowing that I have some questions about Drake's mom, but we're not there yet, but we will get there. So as the Amanda show is over at this point, Brian Peck kind of took over and did what Joe Bell would do, which is, drive Drake around, because Drake is 15, he doesn't have a car. And the reason why Brian Peck was driving it is not Drake's mother is because essentially Drake's mom just didn't want to drive. This led to Drake Bell all alone with no car and essentially in an area where he doesn't have anyone except this one guy, Brian Peck. So he would sleep over at Brian Peck's house alone. Then one morning, and everything changed. I know it's probably an unpopular opinion. Maybe Drake's mom said something in a news article one time, but to hear your ex-husband, I don't care if you guys had an argument, I don't care if you guys were fighting, if you were petty, what have you, right? If your ex-husband, the father of your son, is telling you straight up, this one person, do not let Drake be alone with this one person. And because you didn't feel like driving 1 hour as your child is trying to be this star, this rocker, what have you, and you couldn't drive 1 hour to honor that one wish, did you just really not feel like it? Were you sick? What really made you go, hey, you know what? No, I don't feel like doing that. And Drake's mom, never makes an appearance in this documentary, so I don't know if that relationship is okay, what have you, right? So that one morning, and I've talked about it in my other video, so I will keep, this kind of short, because I think hearing Drake's story from Drake himself, especially now that this is his first time talking about it, I think you should go to the documentary yourself and just hear what he has to say in full context. But basically, he woke up one morning to Brian Peck essentially SAing him, and Brian was pretty much like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, it won't happen again, I don't know what came over me, pretty much saying all the bull excuses that, predators do, right? But of course, as we know, that wasn't the only time, because it would happen again and again and again and again. If you did watch the documentary, you can even see now that Drake is having such a hard time even talking about what happened to him. And I do remember from the article and even in the show, he says, just imagine the worst possible thing someone can do to you as in terms of sexual abuse, and that's pretty much what it was. I know I said two parents did their thing and watched out for these kids, but I do have to bring up a third one, which is Drake's girlfriend's mother at the time, because she was the first person to pick up on the signs that something was wrong. 1, 2, 3. So one night, as Drake Bell is at his girlfriend's house, Brian Peck would call Drake's phone constantly. And I don't mean once, I don't mean twice, I mean over and over and over again. Because apparently Brian wanted to take Drake to Disneyland again, and Drake really didn't want to go. So as soon as, Drake was ignoring those calls, Brian Peck would call the girlfriend's house over and over and over again, to the point where Drake's girlfriend's mother picked up the phone and gave it to Drake and said, here. And Brian was like, hey, what's going on? We were supposed to hang out. And Drake's like, oh no, I'm just gonna stay here. And that was kind of it. So he hung up, and then Brian Peck again called Drake Bell over and over and over again on his cell phone, to the point where Drake's girlfriend's mother had to pull Drake aside to a room and kind of close the door and be like, yo, what's going on? And Drake at first tried to play it off, but you could tell that something was wrong at this point. Drake's girlfriend's mother called Drake's mother and was like, look, I'm gonna take your son to therapy. And Drake goes to therapy, and he pretty much plays it down and, kind of doesn't talk about it. Drake Bell does talk about the mental manipulation that's going on here and how scary Brian Peck really is. Because just like Dan Schneider, Brian Peck has all of these Hollywood connections. So if you were to speak out against Brian Peck, even if he was doing something wrong, then that's just so many connections that you're gonna lose. So Drake saw it that way and he just kind of downplayed the whole situation. And I think he said that he was like, yeah, good thing we caught it before anything happened. Even though that was kind of like his chance to say right there and then that something was happening. So we jump to 2003, and we're talking about the Drake and Josh pilot. When I say Brian Peck was obsessed with Drake Bell, I mean to the point where Brian Peck wanted to be Drake's dad on the Drake and Josh show. Finally, and thankfully, finally, one day Drake was on the phone with his mom and he just let it rip. He said everything that happened to him, and thankfully, at this point, his mom did call the cops and there was a whole investigation, but the investigation was super brutal because they wanted in detail like what happened to Drake, to the point where they tapped the phone and had Drake call Brian to try to get him to admit to everything that he did, which Brian Peck weirdly and surprisingly confessed on the phone. And at the end, he was like, are we being recorded? So even Brian Peck at this point kind of knew the jig was up. So Brian Peck does get arrested and Dan Schneider calls Drake Bell and says, hey, did this have anything to do with you? And Drake was like, yeah, this is kind of what's been going on. And Drake says Dan was very sympathetic and, he was kind of there for him and all this stuff. And what really breaks my heart here is that Drake told his dad that Brian Peck got arrested when it happened. And Joe, oh, sweet Joe, man. He said, I'm glad he didn't get to you. I think that in itself was like, even to me, it felt like Joe was like saying, I think deep down he knew that it was his son, but saying like, oh, I'm just glad he didn't get to you was kind of like his way of saying, I hope it wasn't you. But that's just kind of like my personal opinion about it. But Joe was definitely heartbroken to hear the truth that, it was his son that was, being by Brian Peck. And then we go to fall of 2003, and this is when they started doing Drake and Josh. And Drake said, he feels like he can have fun on set again. But then he talks about self-destruction, which led to substance abuse and alcohol abuse. The documentary producers asked if, at this point, anyone knew that it was him. And Drake said Dan was kind of like the only guy that knew. And again, Drake says that Dan Schneider was there for him. And then we go to October of 2004 to the sentencing, and this is kind of like the big one right here. Drake was a John Doe because he was a minor when this incident happened, so he was anonymous. His name didn't have to be in the newspapers, which I think that's good. I feel like if a child comes forward about this kind of story, I feel like they should be anonymous until they're ready, or if they feel ready. So I kind of appreciate that from the LAPD. This is what I mean when I say Hollywood will always look out for their people. Well, in the courtroom, Drake describes that Brian Peck's side of the room was full of people. People from Hollywood, all these connections that he had. But on his side, on Drake's side, it was just pretty much his family and like one other person. And if that doesn't tell you a power imbalance, will always be in play. A power imbalance will always be in play. And Drake said he refused to address Brian Peck. However, he did address the courtroom of the side that is on Brian Peck's side. And he basically said, you're really gonna sit there and hear all these things that happened to me and still support this man. I know I'm paraphrasing what he said, but essentially he was pretty much getting on their ass for being like, how dare you really support this guy that affected me, the teenager here. And of course, as I've already said in other videos, Brian Peck was sentenced to 16 months and then he had to register as a sex offender. Letters of support. Letters of support are pretty much the defendant's side of like convincing the judge to lighten a sentence, or be like, oh, he's such a good guy, there was probably just a lapse in judgment, pretty much giving any and all types of excuses to get the offender off a little bit easier. And apparently these documents were sealed for a long time, and now we are seeing the names of people that defended Brian Peck in 2004. So, I would like to read some names. You're going to see some pictures. There's going to be people you probably wouldn't expect. You're probably going to see faces that you recognize but never knew their name, and you're still going to be shocked. It's giving Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher when they wrote letters of support for their old coworker that was sentenced and charged. And even then, they tried to clean it up and say, oh, we didn't know all the information, which you knew. Anywho, I'm going to read some names. And I'm going to start with James Marsden, Taryn Killam, Alan Thicke, Ron Melendez, Ryder Strong, Will Freedy, Joanna Kearns, Kimmy Roberts, Rich Correll, and Beth Correll. I would like to say to Rich and Beth especially, who worked with Brian Peck again after he got sentenced. And they worked with him on the Sweet Life of Zach and Cody show, and then tried to act dumb and ask Brian how the court decided and how it ended. And then he pretty much gave them the shortest ass answer possible. To willingly work with somebody that is a registered sex offender that you were around for and wrote letters of support for, and said that you would gladly work with him again, which is another big, like, what are we doing here kind of thing, right? You have registered sex offenders in Hollywood, and you're willing to work with them again. I do want to point this out, and I'm glad the documentary did. Dan Schneider and Nickelodeon executives did not write any letters of support, so I will say that is good. That's kind of like the bare minimum of good. Also want to jump back to the Corrells. They said they had no involvement in casting. However, if you knew about this and you didn't tell Disney, I feel like that's still your fault. They kind of jumped past this really quick. It was just kind of like one scene about it. But there was a third Nickelodeon employee named Ezel Channel. Apparently brought a child onto the lot, essayed him, but Nickelodeon kind of didn't catch on to this. Also, this guy was a registered offender and Nickelodeon still hired him. I have questions. How did you let that slip through your cracks when you just had another employee, 2 employees under you a couple years before that, get in trouble for essentially the same thing? I don't know how you see that and don't implement new things, protect the children on your sets. I feel like the documentary kind of skipped past this a little bit, so I wanted to find an article talking about this, and I'm going to read some excerpts as you can see here. A Nickelodeon Studios animator was sentenced to 7 years and 4 months in prison for committing lewd acts on a 14-year-old boy and showing him adult content. Judge Lisa Lynch ordered Ezel Channel 36 of Tarzana, I don't care where he's from, to serve 16 months in prison for the violating a previous conviction of lewd acts with a child under 14. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison for that conviction. Channel, already convicted registered sex offender, was found guilty of 1 misdemeanor count and of inappropriately touching a 14-year-old boy and 1 felony count of offering to show to the boy earlier this year after he was arrested December 15th, 2005. The boy told police that Channel tried to show him a very adult movie on his computer during a visit to Nickelodeon. He was also accused of luring a 13-year-old boy and a 14-year-old boy to his workplace, showing them adult content and inappropriately touching them in November of 2005. Channel was charged with 2 felony counts of lewd acts with a child under 14 and 2 counts of showing, sending, or distributing harmful materials. Again, I do have to ask how Nickelodeon hired someone that had a record of being inappropriate with children, and that was just kind of an oopsie. I don't think that was an oopsie. I don't get it. It infuriates me that these kids were put in a dangerous situation that if Nickelodeon did their job correctly, this wouldn't have happened. And I think that's what's irritating me the most about that. They skip ahead and talk about the mid-2000s, saying that it was Nickelodeon's golden era, and after the arrest, Nickelodeon had exploded in popularity. And then they talk about iCarly with Miranda Cosgrove and said that with iCarly, Dan was absolutely able to consolidate power. And this was, of course, during the Disney Channel versus Nickelodeon rating wars. And Nickelodeon at this point just basically turned to Dan Schneider when they wanted to get ahead. So Dan Schneider would essentially shoot behind the scenes videos, and you could tell in the videos on the documentary that the cast members, who were all mostly minors, were uncomfortable. It then talks about Zoe 101 and Alexa Nicholas and how she was part of this one scene, and basically Jamie Lynn Spears' character was sprayed in the face with like a syringe, and it was pretty much a sexual kind of thing yet again. So the whole spraying stuff in a woman's face, being really weird about it, is not uncommon to Dan Schneider, because this is the second time we've talked about the same thing in this video. Alexa Nicholas also says that her character on Zoe 101 was for the boys, and what she means by that is the male gaze female, and says that pretty much her character didn't really represent like girls at the time. And I will say, now that I remember, Alexa Nicholas's character was definitely a pick-me, very much, oh my god, I'm gonna wear, like, I wear short skirts, my chest, like something about like, this makes my chest look big, like those kind of things, right? Then we get to this anonymous person who they call in the documentary the costumer. We're gonna get back to the costumer, but I just want to let you know that we do have at least one anonymous person in this documentary. And like I said, we go back to Alexa Nicholas, where she said like the whole thing with Jamie Lynn Spears in that one scene was kind of like the worst memory she had when working on the Zoe 101 show. And apparently some boys, said, oh, it's a... We now talk about Mike Denton, who was a cameraman, and he even said like so many things could be seen as sexual innuendos. actors holding certain objects and like licking things, getting close-ups, things like that. Then we skip to Victorious, which of course is another Dan Schneider show, where they bring up again Ariana Grande and these compilations that were found on YouTube. And they had the Juice video, but it was just like a lot of videos where like she's putting her fingers in her mouth, biting her feet. A great question that came up during this documentary, and I feel like this is one I would love to hear answered, is who is sexual innuendos for on a kid's show? And that really resonated with me, because what is the answer to that? Because it's not for kids, but if it's not for kids, then it's for adults, right? So why would a kid show have innuendos for adults unless the adults in charge of those innuendos knew exactly how it was going to look? I tweeted about this, and there was like this one interview clip where Dan Schneider was basically saying, I can make my cast do whatever I want, I can make them do embarrassing things. And I'm very confused how Nickelodeon sees this clip or hears this like quote and doesn't immediately put him on the sideline and tell him to shut the F up, because in hindsight, that was probably one of the worst things you can say in the circumstances that you have given this platform of sexualizing minors being okay. Now we're jumping back to the costumer, who was the anonymous person that I mentioned earlier. They were talking about how Dan Schneider would always want massages. Even texted someone that was working on 2 shows at the time, was like, I would like a massage. And that person went to go do it because Dan Schneider was that scary and he was that powerful at Nickelodeon. And the costumer said that everybody kind of knew about this, so it's pretty much like, who do we complain to about this? And I think that's just another question that I would also like the answer to. And then now we're jumping a couple years later, and it's 2014, and I brought this up earlier where the Kids' Choice Awards pretty much honored Dan Schneider for a lifetime achievement. And something that was noticed is that Jeanette McCurdy didn't show up. 8 years later in 2022, they talk about how Jeanette McCurdy released the book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, which pretty much talks about the creator, which a lot of people do believe is talking about Dan Schneider, and just how mean he was and how vile and nasty he was. Dan Schneider's treatment was kind of like an open secret, and he would like humiliate or fire you on the spot if you like messed up on set. Someone in the documentary mentioned the torture genius kind of thing, where it's like, oh, if this person's such an he must be amazing at what he does, but in reality he is just an. So Sammy Cat was like the worst time for Jeanette McCurdy, and after an investigation, they discovered how toxic he made the sets that he was on. So Dan Schneider finally was banned from pretty much interacting with the cast directly. Dan Schneider, however, says that he wasn't banned, but he would give notes from his office. But circumstantially, seeing how he was so excited to always interact with his cast and like mess with them, I'm finding that very hard to believe that that's true. I do think Nickelodeon, give him credit for this, I do think they barred him from talking to the kids directly because of the investigation and how bad it was going to look. However, this definitely didn't last long, so good job Nickelodeon, but not really. 3 years later, Dan Schneider was back on Nickelodeon sets with kids with Henry Danger and Game Shakers, which is another 2 shows that Dan Schneider was a part of. This is also the time of the Me Too movement, and if you remember the Me Too movement, if you are old enough, just just gonna do a quick refresher. The Me Too movement was basically all of these people that were affected by Hollywood and the men in Hollywood and speaking up and telling their stories of, you know, SA and abuse in the workplace. And this led to the costumer feeling like during this movement, they could finally talk to somebody about what Dan Schneider has been doing and what he's done. So the costumer would call the union, and the union told them, like, hey, you're not the only one that's talked about this, and we are definitely looking into it. Then Nickelodeon launches another investigation on Dan Schneider, and they drop Dan Schneider officially on March 26th, 2018. Gave him $7 million. I think it's like a severance package, whatever. However, during this investigation, they found no evidence of him grooming or being inappropriate with a minor. Now, with Dan Schneider being gone, the energy in the sets were better. Everybody was having more fun. But Alexa Nicholas, one of the people, said like at the end of season 2 of Zoe 101, she just couldn't go back without crying. So that just kind of led to her exit from the show, I think. And then we get near the end where all of the actors that were featured in this documentary was talking about, you know, burnout and just trying to be normal. But in reality, when you leave Hollywood to try to be normal, the transition is just so much harder because you lived this one life and now you're living a whole different life, and it's just like a different pace. I am very surprised, by the way, that in this documentary, Drake Bell talks about the incident in 2021, and he said that the media got a lot of misinformation and it just was a bad time for him. I am probably going to look into the Drake Bell thing again, maybe for a future video. I'm not sure yet, but I definitely would like to look into that a little bit more, because some people are on one side of this argument saying like he was never charged, but he just kind of did what the court said, and then another side is saying, you know, he should have known better, he's a predator, that's no excuse. So I definitely maybe might look into that. And then we get to the grand finale, and this is kind of like the end of it all, where Drake said that he checked himself in, got a lot of help, got a lot of therapy. You know, all these actors and actresses were saying, you know, there needs to be better protection for the kids involved in this and just looking out for them and their best interests and keeping them safe. And I fully agree, right? We are in a time where the internet is forever. I feel like if somebody tried something now, it will be caught and like burned to the stake 10 times over. But we can only see. There are some productions still on Nickelodeon with Dan Schneider's name. So until those productions are off the air, Dan Schneider still has this lingering effect around Nickelodeon. And at the final end of the documentary, Nickelodeon and Dan Schneider's statements that I've read before came up, and I'm not gonna read them again because I don't agree with it. I feel like Nickelodeon knew what was going on. I feel like Dan Schneider passed the buck and tried to blame everybody and never took any accountability. So that's just kind of how it ends. I think in the end, and this is just my final thoughts on everything, it breaks my heart to see that once again, you know, people we idolized, you know, people we, you know, adored as kids went through all these traumatic things and then they had to smile through the pain. I can only imagine how much of a lifetime of anguish they're going to deal with, and I am praying for them in a way. And I guess I really, in the end, I guess I want to say why this affected me so much. If you have made it this far, I would like to say thank you. But for me, when I was a kid, right, the one thing I always wanted to be, and I really do mean this, and This is why I got into acting in high school, and I tried to be an actor in college, but obviously it didn't work out. I wanted to be a Nickelodeon kid more than anything. I wanted to be on the Slime Time shows. I wanted to be on Double Dare. I wanted to, you know, be at the Kids' Choice Awards. I wanted to do all those things that I saw on TV and I thought were like fantastic, right? Like, I really wanted to be an actor. And to think that, I was going to be what, 16, 17 when I really wanted to get into acting in high school with no experience. And I was like, I want to be a Disney kid. I want to be a Nickelodeon kid. And hearing what they had to deal with, I don't know how I would be okay. And the fact that they were able to sit down, give us their stories, give us their time, I respect the hell out of that. And I know Drake Bell is a hot button topic when it comes to, of course, what he did in 2021 or what he didn't do in 2021. For those that have been affected, not just the actors, not just the people in this documentary, but people that have been affected in real life, like you guys, me, that's been affected by, grooming and sexual misconduct and things like that. I would just like to say to anybody that's listening this far, I know this is about an hour and a half, 2 hours in, I'm here for you. It's not your fault, and you are heard. And honestly, I think that's all I have to say. I think I've spoken enough. This was kind of like a movie-length video. I haven't really done this in a while, but there were so many important things I wanted to touch on. And I think I've said everything I need to say. I think I've said my piece. I'm definitely going to see if Nickelodeon does anything, but I don't think they will. It wouldn't surprise me. Them even moving the Kids' Choice Awards back to avoid this, it just kind of tells me that they're still trying to hide their ass and save their own ass. And honestly, that's very disappointing. So hopefully Nickelodeon will do the right thing one day and just take accountability for some parts in this. I know they weren't responsible for everything. I'm very well aware of that. But to say that, oh, we do investigations and all this stuff, but it took decades to do the right thing and then you still bring the person back, pretty much tells me it was all a PR stunt. And I think that's all I have to say. Once again, it is Malcolm. That's me. If you have made it this far, thank you. If you have to go to bed, good night. If you're waking up, good morning. If you're eating lunch, have at it. I really wasn't like jokey here today, but we'll get to the jokey joke videos tomorrow, another day. I don't know. I don't know when I'm going to post again. This kind of took a lot out of me. This will be one of my longest videos all year, and I hope I did the documentary justice. I hope I gave my fair critiques and fair opinions and fair reactions. I hope I didn't bore you, but if you made it this far, obviously I didn't. If you subscribed, thank you. And I don't have much else to say except I wish you well. I wish you good health. And I will see you all again. And yes, I will see you again.